The story of monetary policy is really one of the central narratives in this book because there was such a consequential revolution in that space, and it was directly the result of Milton Friedman's ideas. And so it's just a fascinating story about the way that really one man can reshape the approach to economic policy, not just in the United States, but around the world. It's an amazing story. And the short version of it goes like this. It used to be the case in the aftermath of World War II that monetary policy was regarded as a bit player. The government was focused on fiscal policy as the primary lever of macroeconomic policy. And they thought that they had the ability to really, manage economic growth by, tinkering with taxation and with spending. And Friedman begins to argue vigorously, even before he has the evidence for it, that really this is misplaced, that the result is never going to be good, that what you want to do is focus on monetary policy. And in focusing on monetary policy, you want to take a very narrow view of what that means. In his view, you should just increase the supply of money at a regular rate. You should try to take sort of in the face of uncertainty, adopt a minimal approach to moving forward. I think of this as the question of how one moves through a dark room, basically. The Keynesians were very much of the view that you sort of grope your way through the room, try to adjust situationally, respond to the individual obstacles as you confront them. And Friedman, by contrast, was saying, no, the best way to get across is to walk a slow, straight line across that room. That will produce the best results on average, basically. And so he argued for what came to be called monetarism, this approach, and gradually prevailed, beginning in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. He brilliantly made a series of predictions about the results of the Fed's monetary policy that he publicly contrasted with the Fed's expectations, and showed repeatedly that he was right and they were wrong, that his mechanics better explained what was happening in the economy. And as the economy faltered in the 1970s, policymakers began to say, okay, our tools aren't working. How do we adjust our understanding of what is happening here? Friedman has said that, the way that economists influence public policy, and I think it's a profound insight, is when things break down, you have an alternative ready to go. And that's what happened in the 70s. There was this breakdown in economic understanding.
Stagflation, high unemployment, and inflation, which was thought to be impossible in the Keynesian framework.
Yeah, one of the stories I tell in the book, which I love, is about a woman named Juanita Krebs, who was a professor of economics at Duke University and also the Commerce Secretary in the Carter administration. She resigns from the Carter administration in the late 70s because she's become so frustrated with their inability to grapple with these problems. And she also resigns as a professor at Duke University because she says she doesn't know what to teach her students about economics anymore. And that story, more than anything, captures for me sort of the existential crisis of Keynesianism in those years.
Yeah, that would make Diogenes very happy. That's such a rare, an honest professor, an honest economist. You got to search high and low for him.
Absolutely. And so what happens is Paul Volcker, who, not necessarily because he was a student of Friedman's, but because their minds met and they agreed about these issues, comes into power in those years and adopts, he declares war on inflation in so many words. And he sets out to really break the back of inflation expectations in the United States and implements a new approach to monetary policy that is focused on inflation. If you look around the world, the Central Bank of New Zealand is a great example of this. Their mandate in the 1970s had like 8 objectives in it. They were responsible for trade balances. They were responsible for the exchange rate. They were responsible for unemployment. They were responsible for all sorts of things. And it was stripped down to just one, which is hit an inflation target. That's sometimes portrayed, by the way, that the rise of inflation targeting, which is what emerges in the aftermath of the Volcker era, was certainly portrayed at the time as a failure of Milton Friedman's ideas. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think it was his victory in a slightly different form than he anticipated. But the idea that monetary policy was central, that it should be minimalist in its approach, that it should just try to keep things on an even keel, was really the core of his idea. And by convincing people that that was the proper approach to monetary policy, he gradually changed the approach to central banking around the world.